Hello and welcome back to another episode of Creedle. I'm joined today by a longtime friend of mine, Jon Askonas. Jon is an assistant professor of politics at the Catholic University of America and a senior fellow at the Foundation for American Innovation. We go back several years, I think probably 12 years or so at this point, Jon. We were both,
way back.
Both graduate students at Oxford, so we spent many a day having tea or sharing a pint at various pubs or in each other's homes, talking about the state of the world and politics and religion and all of that, all the good things that you think of as Oxford graduate students doing. It was what we did. And I don't know about you, Jon, but I miss those days for sure.
Oh, I mean, every day. I remember having a little Bible study at your little newlywed pad with Sally and
That's right.
Some of the fellows at Oxford, and those are golden days.
Yeah, it was a good time. And I know we haven't met up in person for a while, but one of the last times we did come across each other in person was, I think we had planned to do this. We saw you in Austin because you were previously a senior fellow at the Clemens Center for National Security, or a fellow at the Clemens Center. Postdoctoral fellow, I think was the title. I forget exactly.
Predoctoral.
Oh, that's right, because you were still wrapping up.
Finishing up.
Yeah. So predoctoral fellow at the Clemens Center for National Security. That was when we were in Austin, so we would hang out with you guys a bit then.
Yep.
But I remember on one occasion we invited you over for a Super Bowl party, and this was in early 2018, the 2017 season. So this was what ended up becoming the Eagles' first Super Bowl. And I'm a huge Eagles fan, as you may recall. So, we almost got the chance to celebrate that in person. So it's kind of fitting, I think, Jon, that of course we're having this conversation as the Eagles are potentially on the verge of their second Super Bowl. I don't want to jinx anything.
Don't want to jinx anything. That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Here we are.
Well, great to be with you. I'm glad to see that you're doing well. I'm glad to see that you're out shaping ideas about the future for America's families. And I know that your experiences, of course, in international relations is what we were studying together in Oxford. And at some other point we can let you wax eloquent on asymmetric warfare in Vietnam, because I know that you've done a lot of work on there. In fact, I would commend to my listeners, back when Ken Burns made his multi-part documentary on the Vietnam War, which is very impressive. Jon went through. Was this for War on the Rocks, Jon?
Was it for War on the Rocks? Yeah, it was like 5. I think my initial ambition was to do 10 essays for 10 episodes. I think the work of the PhD caught up to me a little bit. So I think I only made it through 4 essays of a kind of multi-part review of the documentary.
Yeah. So if you have an interest in military history, history of international security, etc., Vietnam War, you should go check that out. War on the Rocks, Jon Askonas, Vietnam War, and he has these sort of review essays of the documentary, which was the topic of, at least provided a lot of the substance for your doctoral dissertation. Right. Well, Jon, great to be with you. I'm still hopeful that one of these days you'll be the Secretary of State. So I'm at least glad that you're continuing to move in that direction and move in all these circles of policymakers and thinkers who are advancing things. And one of the most recent, or at least the most visible things you've been doing recently, is thinking about how technology and technological development shapes the human family. And you are a co-author of a statement called A Future for the Family. It was published in First Things, but any of my listeners can go to afutureforthefamily.org and actually read through this. But this is a document, very important, I think, and great that people are articulating this and articulating it in such concise and coherent ways that argues that this new era of technological change that we find ourselves entering into is going to have profound effects, whether we like it or not, on the future of the family. And we need to be careful about how we proceed forward so that we don't lose this all-important building block of human society that we call the human family. So, Jon, maybe let's start with a very, very sort of background question to this document, A Future for the Family, this project. It's more than a document, because there's a website you can go on. Anyone can go sort of co-sign this document. I assume there will be sort of lectures and maybe eventually, monographs, maybe books, etc. But this is hopefully just the beginning of a real movement to shape the future of technology for the family. How did you get involved in this? And what was the process like getting in the room with your co-authors to sort of draft some initial statements about what you want to cover and how we should think about technology and family intersecting?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me on. I mean, this project really emerged out of conversations with Michael and some colleagues who were each, working with Brad Littlejohn, Claire Morrell, who EPBC, Emma Waters, the Heritage Foundation, Michael Toscano at the Institute for Family Studies. And each of us, I think, has worked on different ways in which different responses by family-oriented thinkers, social conservatives, to particular technologies that have emerged as threatening the family. Everything from online pornography and the pervasive effects of smartphone usage on families to reproductive technology, IVF, IVG, surrogacy. And then from my perspective, maybe Michael Toscano's as well, thinking a little bit more generally about the kind of political economy, the way that technology reshapes the political economy in which families live, and feeling that the American conservatives usually have a kind of reactive approach to new technologies, which is to say some new technology comes up, it radically reshapes the kind of social environment. Conservatives, sound the alarm about this and find maybe ways of regulating or pushing back against some of these harmful effects, and then just sort of forget about it, and then the process restarts. And you can tell a story about literally dozens of technologies over the last century. And wanting to actually have a framework to think proactively about the more general problem, the more general way in which technological change can reshape the environment in which the family lives, for good or for ill. And the concern being that is if family-oriented thinkers don't have a sense of what technology is for and the way that technology can serve the family, then there's no alternative to this kind of purely reactive approach. So the effort here is to develop a framework for thinking about how do you build a technological order that is good for the family, and then how do you shape that in policy, law, regulation, culture, investment, etc. So that's sort of the bigger project.
You mentioned that it's proactive, but it also occurs to me that this is a project that in some ways is, I have to say, like 25 years overdue, right? Because if we were having these conversations earlier when, for example, the iPhone was being developed, we might have developed the iPhone in such a way that we wouldn't make it fertile ground for TikToks and all sorts of TikTok clones to just come and steal our children's attention spans, So yes, it's proactive in that we're thinking now about AI and we're thinking about the proliferation of TikTok clones and all of that and how that will reshape our society in myriad ways. But it's, overdue in the sense that we should have been thinking about this a long time ago. I'm glad that people finally are, but was any of this born from this recognition that we've failed for the last 25 years and we've allowed technology to sort of overrun the family in ways that are in some ways irreversible, but at the very least, very dangerous?
I think 25 years is a very generous estimate. I wrote an essay in Compact Magazine 2.5 years ago called Why Conservatism Failed. That makes the case that this is sort of the signal failure of kind of Burkean conservatism going back really 300 years, at least 200 years. And to give conservatives a little credit, what I think what the actual story is that this happens in waves, but there have been prior waves of deep concern about technological change, but because they didn't amount to an overarching framework of kind of first principles thinking about what technology is at a deep level, each of these waves kind of responded to the particular challenges of the day. And there's some of that in the statement. The statement addresses some things that are kind of concern to parents and families right now. But I hope what's different this time is that maybe this time we can build on our current alarm and our current concern and attention to the problem of technology in ways that are more durable.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Let's go through a few of the things in the statement itself. I'm going to share my screen if the software will let me here. Here we go. So I have I've copied this into a Word document for ease of reading, but if anyone wants to read it, it is called A Future for the Family, and you can just search first things, A Future for the Family, or go to afutureforthefamily.org. But I want to highlight a couple things, literally, I guess, John, to talk about here. Let's talk about this line here. Our present technologies are not, however, designed to serve the family. They were developed to accomplish military, bureaucratic, and corporate purposes without regard to effects on families. Talk to me a little bit about these present technologies not being designed to serve the family and instead accomplishing military, bureaucratic, and corporate purposes. And maybe before you do, a very quick story. I was participating in a debate in May for an organization called Mortality, and the question in the debate was resolved: prayer apps are beneficial to the spiritual life. And Mortality, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. They're great guys. Yeah. Mark Barnes and Jacob Imam run it, and there's several Franciscan University of Steubenville faculty who are involved. A great organization. I really like what they're trying to do and the questions that they're asking and what they're trying to get people to think about. But right before I went, Jacob Imam gave an address, gave a talk, and his talk was all about how the military has ruined everything, basically the sort of militarization of society, and how even many of the technologies that we take for granted, like processed and canned foods, were originally developed by the military specifically to send overseas so that our troops could be fed. And then when the war was over, we never went back to the sort of peacetime footing of production. We just kept up this militarized, bureaucratic, automatized process of dehumanizing every aspect of society. And then he railed against, military contractors and all the bad that they do and the bloat that they cause and the fact that they just perpetuate this militarization, all of which are valid points. And then I go up as literally the next featured event is this panel where I'm speaking, and I have to go up and introduce myself as a former military Air Force officer and defense military data consultant as a DoD contractor. Before I, found the light and worked at Hallow. So it was a very funny intro and just dovetailed perfectly with an introduction that completely destroyed my credibility at the outset. And it was very funny. But in your view, what are these sort of military, bureaucratic, and corporate purposes that are achieved through the current technology domain that we have?
I mean, if that's exactly right, and this is a very important line to highlight. If you think about where are the major investments in new technologies, in applied science? So this is taking scientific research and figuring out new things that you can do with that. What purposes do they serve? And it is almost universally, without exception, military serves some direct military purpose, the purpose of some profit-seeking corporation, or the purposes of a handful of bureaucratic is sort of a big umbrella, but organizations like NSF, NIH, DARPA, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, whatever, large entities that sit particularly in the kind of basic and applied science research side of things. So the way that things work is, these very large world-shaping organizations face problems that they want to solve with technology. They invest billions of dollars in developing solutions to those. And in that process, the family is quite literally an afterthought, in that if the family is thought of at all, it is thought of on the very back end as, how do we make this palatable to society, right? And so there's some, there are deep reasons why this is the case. And yet the end result is that the technological order is constantly being renewed and changed under capitalism. And that's part of what capitalism means. The capital in capitalism is a shorthand really for investment in technologies of production, their development, their distribution, their refinement. The family has almost no place in that process. And so it's no surprise that the family is, as an institution, is constantly being buffeted by these forces.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the things that I appreciate about the wording of much of this is just how it needs to be supporting the family. These things should be developed not just in a sort of family neutral sort of way, but actually in a way that buttresses the family. So it's not good enough to just say, oh, this is a net negative or net neutral effect on the family. Or that it's not a net negative effect on the family, but that actually we should be developing technologies to support and actively empower the family. I'm not sure if you've read yet the new Vatican document, Antica Nova, on AI.
No, it's on my to read list. It looks impressive.
Yeah, this is I can send you mine that has some highlights that would at least enable your quick skim. But this is one of the points it makes as well, that the use of technology, that technology is not value neutral, and that it always must be used to actually empower human labor and activity and enhance our understanding of human dignity, and to never diminish human dignity. And so I like that you guys use this sort of language as well. There's another phrase here that you use, economic dynamism. What do you mean by economic dynamism, and why is that important?
Yeah, so I think what we mean by economic dynamism is economic growth and increase in the kind of productive powers available to mankind. I think there is a recognition. So one kind of early conservative, maybe the classic conservative response to technology is as William F. Buckley put it, standing in thwart history yelling stop, or at least they're yelling slow down. And you can look before Buckley to figures like John Ruskin, G.K. Chesterton, Edmund Burke, who response to these kinds of change at a more kind of practical level, the sort of the Luddites, the followers of Ned Ludd, not to be dismissed out of hand.
Yep.
For whom the response to technological change was to stop it or slow it down in the interest of preserving vital social institutions, traditions, communities, etc. I think that there is I don't think one can dismiss that out of hand, but I think this is my personal take. I think that the meaning of that becomes different in a world that is already built upon this sort of technological infrastructure, and in a world in which fertility is declining and is past the sort of tipping point into negative demographic growth. Because if you are in the world in which we currently live, where human populations in developed countries are already would be net declining, if not for immigration, in which all of the countries, at least in the United States, that send us immigrants are themselves past the tipping point into demographic decline. If you are not, at the same time, you're trying to solve these really fundamental social and civilizational issues, which are absolutely existential for the future of Western civilization. If you're not safeguarding some measure of productivity growth at the same time, you will hit an absolute brick wall of decline, of not just negative demographic economic growth, but decline in quality of life, decline in education, and then I fear then the problem becomes insoluble, in the sense that a world characterized by returning to say 1950s era levels of economic activity will look very different when you have an upside down demographic pyramid. And then you also get very deep and dark pressures towards things like euthanasia, for example.
Right.
So I think the only way to kind of land the airplane here is to find a way to transition towards a family-oriented technological order while maintaining enough productivity growth to at least maintain kind of standards of living.
I think it makes sense, and I think it's helpful that you all frame it this way, because the last thing that you want is for people to dismiss you because they perceive you as just the person who's standing on the highway yelling stop.
Yep.
It is, also, however, of course. Yep. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the other part of it, the conservatives have been maybe reluctant to recognize is, that many of the traditions, cultures, habits, practices that made that older order sustainable are also not in evidence anymore. The minimum, they have to be kind of rebuilt, right? So if tomorrow we turned off the kind of agricultural industrial complex, you don't get an overnight return to homesteading, right? We don't have those. We don't have the capacities. We don't have the family structure. There's so many other things that it would not be a smooth transition, let's put it that way. And so I think we have to be very extremely realistic about where we are as a society.
No, I think that's right. It's good, to just recognize that empirical fact. I'm sort of shuddering as I think about trying to shut off the agricultural industrial complex and then everyone revert to homesteading, it would look like a zombie apocalypse. I think, that shift would not be, to say it would not be smooth is a massive understatement. I think it's interesting though. So conservatives should certainly be careful about yelling stop. But I also think about Jurassic Park, one of the greatest films of the 90s, and Jeff Goldblum's character, when he has this monologue about the technocratic imperative. You probably remember this, but he's saying, the problem, John, speaking to, what's the actor's name who plays the billionaire? John Hammond. He plays John Hammond, but the famous British actor. The name's escaping me. It'll come back to me. But anyway, he's saying the problem, John, the problem here is that it didn't require any discipline to attain it. Your scientists are standing on the shoulders of those who came before them. They have no idea of the consequences of their actions, and they're just pursuing it. They've spent so much time thinking about what they could do, they never stop to think if they should do it. And while we never want to be the person who's just, always standing on the highway yelling, stop, 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 it doesn't mean that there's never an appropriate time to yell stop. And I think it's important to remember that as well. And this is, I think, this is what you're doing intelligently in this document. Like, if we're doing these things that are destroying the family, stop. There are better ways to do this. And I think one of those things, so I'm looking at item 1, because you have a 10-part list here. We can go through a few of these. Item 1, respect the natural cycle of mortality by healing or mitigating chronic disease rather than pursuing radical life extension, and palliate the suffering of terminal illness rather than artificially accelerating death. As you probably remember, John, Sally did her master's in England in bioethics and medical law. So this has been a long-running interest of hers. My last podcast on this feed was with my friend who's a palliative care doctor. And this is an immensely important part of human existence today that will only become more important as more people die and more people try to do this, pursue this radical life extension. So from your standpoint, why is this, I get why this is important. And I think most listeners here understand why this is important, but why is this important specifically for the family to not pursue radical life extension and to not artificially accelerate death?
It's a great question. And I think, the answer is, when it comes to radical life extension, and I think it's not a coincidence that we paired it with euthanasia. We've paired radical life extension with artificial death, which seems like almost opposites, but actually they're spiritually the same. They both reflect a loss of the proper order of goods and mortality in its relationship to the family as a futural institution, right? The family, the social and spiritual contract on which the family is based is a contract of the cycle, the natural human cycle of birth and dependency in birth on the family, of maturity and a growing kind of capability and agency in the world. And then as one ages, return to dependency on the family, in this case, not your parents, but your children, and a kind of recognition of the need to hand on things to the future through one's children, right?
Got it.
And I think both euthanasia and radical life extension are a way of breaking this contract. And the technological upshot of that is you pursue technologies that are, regardless of their individual effects, have an extremely deleterious effect on the overall social, on the ways that we invest in this natural cycle. So I'll give you a few concrete examples. One, are you familiar with Brian Johnson?
Yeah, for sure. Of course.
Brian Johnson, the Blueprint guy, Never Die. It's this sort of thing. There's a little something tongue in cheek about it. I have a certain amount of respect for Brian, particularly for, he's doing experiments in nutrition and science on himself, and and work building in public, as they say. But one of the experiments he's done, which I think he stopped doing currently, only because he feels there's a better solution, not for any ethical reason, is he was getting blood plasma transplants from his son. Obviously, huge genetic compatibility or whatever. And at one level, I don't know. I don't know if this harmed his son, but you're quite literally stealing from the future to preserve your own sort of, that cycle of a father handing on, supporting his son is going in reverse. in a very direct way there. You know, and many variations of radical life extension amount to versions of this, of killing the future. I mean, I was, well, ironically, maybe not ironically, maybe very appropriately, I was invited to, but wasn't able to attend Hereticon this year, which is this sort of convention of very heterodox thinkers, because I had a newborn at home. But, you know, at Hereticon, there was one of the proposals was a kind of human cloning program where you would create these brainless clones and use them to, you know, for organs and embryonic stem cells and things for your own sort of radical life extension. And here you're literally diverting your energy and focus away from fostering the next generation through having children to using this generative capacity as a resource for your own purposes. At the same time, on the flip side, with euthanasia, the Lyman Stone has published some really interesting data recently showing that even a marginal increase in the number of, for example, neurodegenerative patients that euthanize themselves destroys the future market value and therefore the viability of treatments for neurodegenerative disorders. You know, if everyone who has certain neurodegenerative disorder is killing themselves instead of pursuing treatment that to restore their function, there will be a market for it.
I mean, it makes sense, right? If you can just hit the easy button for having Alzheimer's, then it becomes normalized for everyone to hit the easy button, and then drug companies are no longer incentivized to try to find ways to solve Alzheimer's.
Yeah, exactly. So even at the level of the technology, there are reasons to think that this upending of the spiritual order has direct effects on the kinds of technologies that we build.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that explanation. Let's go on. I actually have a very quick question on number 3 here, which is all great. Protect human sexuality from ongoing commodification and dehumanization by violent pornography, digital prostitution, child sexual abuse material, deepfakes, AI sexual companions, and sex robots. I mean, some of those things are rampant already. Some of those things are about to be with these sort of AI sexual companions and sex robots. Why is it that the authors, you and the other authors, decided to not just sort of call out all pornography as, you know, supporting the ongoing commodification? I assume that was an intentional choice. Maybe it was an oversight, but I assume it was an intentional choice. And if so, I'm just curious about that.
Oh, I think you can lump pornography, our existing kinds of pornography, in with that. I think we wanted to call attention to, you know, however bad you think the problem is now, it's only going to get worse. So yeah, I don't know if there's a deep.
That makes sense. I mean, I suppose you could describe all pornography as a type of digital prostitution. So I suppose.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's very much in mind. Well, and specifically the move towards, you know, the trend. And my colleagues, Claire Morell and Brad Littlejohn, have a new piece in the New Atlantis called "Stop Hacking Humans," that begins with talking about the kind of rise of OnlyFans. And, you know, I think one of the kind of really disturbing trends right now, right, is, you know, we have examples of, you know, we have, like, pornography is a very old human practice, right? Using images and other things to, you know, scratch that itch, so to speak. Very, you know, you can go back to ancient Rome and find pornographic mosaics in temples to Venus, things like that. The new thing, one of the new things is pervasive digital companionship, and then AI, you know, already being augmented with artificial intelligence, to where, you know, not only are you creating a kind of simulacrum of the sexual relationship, but you're doing it so in a way that is so convincing that, you know, look, online pornography in its current form is so endemic that it is leading to literal infertility in men. You know, in terms of the number of men who struggle with, you know, infertility disorders that were unheard of in men 18 to 40, 50 years ago, 30 years ago even. So, clearly we've reached a point you can analogize between your Roman mosaics or your Playboy centerfolds and online pornography. But actually, clearly at a physiological level, there's been some kind of difference. There's some difference in scale. And so again, I think that's the thing that we're trying to highlight here. And with rise of AI companionship, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, it's pretty stunning to think about the acceleration of that curve. Like if we thought the problem was bad a year ago, the problem a year from now is going to be 10 times worse because everything's going to be that much more customizable, that much more enticing, that much more, fitted to your exact unique desires and needs. And it's going to, it certainly threatens to supplant this real desire for relationship and for companionship. I remember talking to a woman named Kat Rosenfield, who you may have encountered. She writes for the Free Press now, was previously various places on the internet writing, but she's kind of a heterodox thinker, which is why I appreciate what she does. She's certainly like classically liberal. I don't know if she's a person of faith. That I didn't get that sense from her. I know that she, disagrees with me on an awful lot of things, but one of the things she was right about is how much pornography is destroying young men and their capacity for relationships. And her solution was like, just get your teenagers like out, like kick them out and go make them like, she was saying like people should be fooling around in person, not fooling around the internet. And to a degree, I get that. I know what she's saying, and I think there's something to that. Like we need to have these in-person connections, and we should never be replacing a desire for in-person connection with a digital counterfeit, and I'm obviously not endorsing promiscuity.
But even then, but I think it's useful to think about that and point out the ways in which that is so technologically naive, right? It's naive about the reality of pervasive cameras, right? And the permanence of even a kind of dalliance. That's naive about the way that contraception has changed the incentives that men and women, or really in this case, boys and girls face, and how they are experiencing those first kind of innocent flirtations.
Yeah.
I think there's something totally naive from a technological standpoint about that attitude.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's fair, and I'm probably not totally capturing her view, but I remember it standing out to me that, she was just talking about like the sort of decline of the American male and how the American male needs to be assertive and be comfortable with actually like talking to women in real life. What a concept and all that. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like technology has so supplanted all of this. I mean, your point about like how cameras are everywhere is a really important one. And with the rise of AI, I was just seeing actually two things. I saw an article a couple of days ago about a new application of AI that allows an LLM to basically take a picture of where you are and be able to figure out with pretty high degree of accuracy where in the world you are just by, sort of ambient photos of your surroundings. And then just a few hours ago, ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, the parent company of TikTok, announced I think it's called Omni-Human, which is of course not at all a supervillain sounding technology name. Omni-Human, which is it's head and shoulders above the otherwise best in class ability to replicate a human's speech patterns and movement based on a single still image and a sample of their voice. So, like it basically takes deep fakes to a level where they're almost indistinguishable from real. And this is, of course, TikTok. Like in TikTok, of course, they're able to do this, or ByteDance is, because they have the world's largest library of training data on people's faces and mannerisms and voices. And we just gave them to that for free. In fact, we paid them for it because we have paid TikTok billions of dollars in advertising funds. We as, collectively as American corporations. Yep. So it's pretty wild to think about. This is the world in which we're designing.
But the reason I harbored that briefly is, and you think, for all the guff that conservatives get about a kind of return attitude, so-called classical liberals or even progressives, I think are often equally naive about the ways that technology has rewritten social norms.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. Well, a couple, just for sake of time, we're not going to go over all of these other ones, but I do want to talk about a few of these that maybe won't be as familiar to my users. You have a point here about holding companies accountable for designing platforms that undermine human well-being and exploit the most vulnerable phases of childhood development. and remove screens from the center of the classroom while restoring physical books and the mechanical art. So my question here, this is not going to be one that's unknown to you, since I know you've been in these debates about sort of liberalism and post-liberalism and how do we hold companies accountable and all of that. So how do we hold companies accountable? Because, for at least decades, and I would argue for about 150 years, there's been basically a central tenet of American capitalism has been we let the companies run wild because companies are the biggest driving force of innovation, and we really want to reduce regulation as much as we can on that. Regulation is generally seen as a bad thing in the context of American dynamism. In this case, you're saying we want to hold companies accountable for designing platforms in ways that undermine human well-being. And we might just take a very simple example here of Facebook. Several years ago, Mark Zuckerberg had to testify in front of Congress because Facebook was facing accusations of basically engineering their platform in such a way that teenagers, especially whose minds are very neuroplastic still, and desiring of dopamine hits, Facebook designed their platform in such a way that teenagers spent more and more time on it, and were spending, in some cases, 4 or 8 hours a day on Facebook. So that was an example, I think, of a company doing exactly what you're saying they should not do, designing their product in such a way that it actually undermines human well-being. How do we hold them accountable for that?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is in many other areas of life, we have a legal framework which sets kids apart and raises the standards for what you can do to and for kids, certainly without parental permission or approval, and even in products that are marketed to kids, right? You're not allowed to market cigarettes to kids, right? We didn't think that, did that stifle innovation in the tobacco market? Yeah, I guess. But so what? A lot of other areas where this is true. And there are other areas where we recognize, where maybe there's been belated pushback, like, there's been belated pushback in the US, earlier in other countries about like stuffing sugars into breakfast cereals, again, marketed to kids. So, I think that, the long-term, these are marginal costs for these very large companies. So yes, it makes them marginally less profitable to not be able to profit off of selling things to children. It doesn't damage capital investment in the long term. And by the way, these are also companies in many cases with, maybe a more technical point, but these are not capital intensive companies by the way either. They're companies with the largest profit margins of any corporation, in terms of per employee profits, per employee revenue of any firms in world history, right? So I think there's I think this generation of conservatives are much more willing to think about the appropriate uses of state power and police power to protect children. In fact, I don't even, the arguments against these things tend to be very abstract and unconvincing. Now, I do think there are better and worse ways of doing that. I think that a kind of, for example, a situation where you create a regulatory process that intervenes where the state intervenes between the company and the market, often causes more harm than good, often leads to regulatory capture, regulatory moats. I think there are other processes. One process is simple liability, right? A lot of our problems on the internet are downstream of Section 230 and other and a liability regime, which basically lets online platforms do whatever they want without any concern that no matter what harm it's to the point where, in certain court filings, right, these platforms argue that they are not legally responsible for revenge pornography or child pornography on their websites, right? It's just completely absurd. So I think not giving them a special liability shield is, letting our adversarial system actually work is a good first step. And then I think also kind of more blanket rules around like age verification and parental controls. Again, all of these companies built parental controls as a literal afterthought. As in literally they built the platform, they let kids on the platform, and then when a decade later, when they're starting to get real heat about this, they say, oh, maybe we should have some parental controls, right? it's not that hard to imagine a world in which there are requirements about the kinds of parental controls that are built in from the beginning. So yeah, I do think there are better and worse ways of imposing parental authority on these companies, but I don't see the downside in doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dive too far down the sort of Section 230 rabbit hole, but it seems like a lot of the debate is sort of, are these companies like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, are they the postal service, right? Just sort of a like delivery mechanism for things, or are they a newspaper, right? And we instinctively understand that newspapers can be sued for libel when they print something that is false and defaming, but no one sued the postal service, at least I don't think they did, when the postal service was accidentally delivering anthrax-laced envelopes back in 2001, 2002. So yeah, which of these types of models is these companies, which is a better reflection of what they are. And it sounds like you would say the newspaper. I would certainly say the newspaper, and I do think that we should also, remove these liability protections so that we can actually hold them to accountable just by the law that already exists. And that's not very hard to do.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to get too technical here, but the real situation is even more absurd, which is that these companies argue whether they want to be the Postal Service or the New York Times based on whatever gets in those protection in a particular case.
Yeah,
they're not even consistent about that, right? So they claim to be the newspaper when it comes to their ability to censor speech, because the Postal Service can't censor speech, but then. When you want to go after them around that, they say, "Oh, I'm just delivering third-party content to my users, and I can be held accountable for it." So it's an absurd framework.
Pick a lane, guys. Pick a lane. Okay. In the time that we have remaining, I've got to ask you about this final bullet here, which is the one that I got very excited about. Jon, you may not remember this, but so I ended up writing, when I was at Oxford, my my thesis on Reinhold Niebuhr. And went like sort of an international political theory, political theology route. But my first thesis topic was on the space program. And I love the Apollo program. I love sort of geeking out on the history of development in space. And this final bullet was pretty exciting to read. Launch projects that encourage man's cultivation of the natural world and elevate the human spirit, such as a renewed manned spaceflight program and the tech-enabled rewilding of parts of the American West. Dismantle government incentives that push the American people toward artificial or virtual substitutes to embodied life, such as subsidies for lab-grown meat and the liability regime that punishes embodied industries and activities. This is great. Let's break this down. What exactly do you mean by this? Let's actually go kind of bottoms up here. This embodied industries and activities idea. What is an embodied industry and activity?
Yeah, so since the 1970s, we have made it increasingly impossible to do good things in the world of atoms, and we basically, you can do whatever you can do almost nothing you want in the world of atoms, and you can do everything you want in the world of bits. On the theory, apparently, that like the world of bits and ideas and symbols and information has no spiritual significance or can't hurt you, and then anything, the total safetyism and total liability for anything in the world of atoms. So you have a situation where, for example, TikTok could show children anorexia content. You could literally, harm hundreds of thousands of American children with anorexia flavored content without being sued. But if the TikTok, playground for the employees of TikTok employees' children, it wasn't absolutely covered in rubber or wood chips or whatever, they could be sued for somebody getting a splinter or falling from, just as absolute absurdity of liability here.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So you have a world where, and then think about employment, right? The downshoot of this is the world of employment in which people are stuck behind screens, stuck in white collar jobs, stuck in service jobs, which are not sort of spiritually and physically fulfilling, because it's impossible to meet environmental, workplace safety, et cetera, regulatory standards to actually build stuff in the real world. We're actually building the kinds of energy that would enable you to do more things in the real world is illegal or incredibly costly. So it's just a totally upside down. It is a liability regime structured towards virtuality and away from reality. And that is a policy choice. That's not something we had to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and one problem is the liability regime. I think the other problem is that when we make the liability regime such, that way, we end up making the sort of default mode of pursuing risks a digital one.
Yes.
And
Yep.
when that's the case, we end up just having people like how many people today, how many young people today want to actually build rocket ships and go to the moon, and how many of them want to be content creators and make YouTube videos, right? That's a problem. Like people are now preferring to live in the world of bits because they see it as a low capital product. You already talked about how these tech companies have some of the highest, revenue per employee rates of any company in history because they're able to have such a low overhead. You're basically running server costs and paying their staff, and in return, they're getting paid billions and billions of dollars to run ads, right? And so that becomes the sort of the get rich quick path. How can I become a content creator and be the next MKBHD or whatever and start reviewing tech products? Or how can I invest in crypto, right? Which is it's all ethereal. This is like a digital currency is all a separate discussion, and there's some merit to that, but that should not be the default get rich mode of our young people. Like we need to actually default to the world, as you said, the world of atoms, and build things and pursue greatness. And I love that. So let's maybe transition into a tech-enabled rewilding of parts of the American West. What does that look like? What's a renewed manned spaceflight program look like? Is it just, is it SpaceX and Blue Origin battling for Mars primacy, or is there a role for government involvement here to do a new Apollo program to get to Mars? How do you envision that?
Yeah, I think we need, there's one of the interesting kind of claims in Peter Thiel's kind of work of political philosophy masquerading as a business book, 0 to 1, is that the kind of conventional story about, say, the Apollo program is that you have all of these technical capabilities that maybe come out of basic science research, and you can kind of cobble them together into a much bigger program like the Apollo program that then gets you to Mars. And Peter Thiel claims, and I think he's absolutely right, there's interesting evidence supports this, that's the exact opposite of the truth, which is that you need a vision and a desire and the will to go to the moon in order to develop the program that will then solve all the engineering challenges that get you to the moon, right? There's this amazing, I'm going to look it up because it's such a good quote. It's a quote by de Saint-Exupéry, the French author of The Little Prince. It says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I think that's exactly right.
That's good. That's good.
So it's the desire, it's the spiritual desire to accomplish something. It's this grand project that sort of has its hooks in your soul that then gets you to actually take on the risk and overcome the hardship to accomplish something amazing. And so, I think that if your society doesn't have those sorts of things, it's spiritually dead. And those are just two examples we gave of these kinds of big projects. It's sort of immaterial, I think, in some cases, whether it's government funded, government supported, whether it's the state that's doing it. I think we've got a good thing going right now with I think the danger with the commercial side is, the commercial side is really good at distributing and developing and intensifying capital once you already have big breakthroughs. But it takes, let's not kid ourselves, right? It's not like space companies. It's visionary founders like Elon Musk, like Jeff Bezos, who have a deeper desire in their souls to do something that have led to these breakthroughs, right? It was not United Rocket Associates, or, if you're a space company, your goal is to make money off of space. And you don't do that by envisioning colonizing Mars. The problem with the state-directed approach is it the right project? And then you can get bogged down in kind of bureaucratic process detail. It could be another kind of budget line item, which is sort of the state of NASA manned space today. So, but I think the crucial thing is the vision, and then being willing to give agency to visionary leaders who can take accountability for these programs, whether or not they're working for the government or working for a commercial entity. On the rewilding the American West, I mean, I think there's so much that can be done to restore the sort of vision of the frontier.
I think people want that. And I think about the success of Yellowstone and how popular Yellowstone has been as a television show. People love it. Everyone's talking about Yellowstone. Every American wants to be a cowboy. There's something about the sort of cowboy identity that is so wrapped into the DNA of Americans. We all want that. We all want to ride horses and live on the vast plains and the foothills of the mountains. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think there are ways to do that, to integrate that into modern life with technology that I think have not been appreciated. So, for example, one of the big impediments to bison meat is super good for you, super lean. One of the impediments to raising bison at scale is that they require very, very large, relative to cows, they require huge amounts of land.
Yeah.
To graze and to roam over, and then it's literally hard to keep track of them. Well, with GPS, with drones, it's much easier with AI based visual classification. It's much easier to imagine keeping track of a multi-thousand herd of bison over a massive range than it was. That was basically technologically impossible before maybe 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So, you could imagine a future of American cowboys taking care of herds of bison, maintaining the drones that are shepherding and keeping a watchful eye on this herd, or roaming over the Rockies. Like these kinds of things are possible now in a way that was not true even not very long ago.
Well, I think it requires I'm all for rewilding the West. That'd be great.
Yeah, it requires a little bit of imagination and rethinking. What do we want our society to look like? I think our society has been kind of, if you compare America today to America 100 years ago, 250 years ago, there's been a huge narrowing of the way that young men and women sort of see themselves and imagine their futures. And I want to sort of see, it's time to reopen that aperture.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree with you more. Well, Jon, we'll end the discussion there just to preserve your time. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and the listeners about all these fantastic ideas. And thanks for your time co-authoring this document. To my listeners, if you want to check it out, afutureforthefamily.org, and you can go add your name to the statement there as well, which if you like what we just read and talked about, I certainly encourage you to do. So please check that out, afutureforthefamily.org. Jon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Zach.
Absolutely. And to my listeners, if you have any questions for Jon, you can send me a note, zach@crucialpodcast.com, and I can always forward them along. So feel free to reach out. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining for another episode. And until next time, God bless you.